Hello, we're very excited to have you here today. Are you ready to learn how to take the best pics? Well, we want you to participate in the MILSET Esteem Photo Contest 2021 and have a lot of fun. You don't need to be a professional photographer to get fantastic shoots. You just need to love science, find something that captures your eye, and of course, watch this great talk, Do's and Don'ts for Better Pics. Don't forget to submit your best pictures to the contest. Find the registration link in spc.milset.org before July 31st. And well, the International Movement for Leisure Activities in Science and Technology, MILSET, is very glad to have you all here in this conference. My name is Liz Vela, MILSET Communication Manager, and I want to thank the MILSET Executive Committee, MILSET Honorary President, MILSET Advisor, MILSET Regional Executive Committees, and of course, MILSET members for all the support to all MILSET programs. Today, we're streaming live on MILSET Facebook and MILSET YouTube channel. At the end of this conference, there will be a question and answer section. So we suggest writing your questions through the corresponding channel. Now, I give the floor to Bere Suarez, MILSET Managing Director. Bere, the mic is yours.
Hi, everybody. Today, we are glad to receive a passionate professional and also a photographer who believes in the science and arts as a social development part. So, welcome to Mr. Norman Fafard. His academic background includes a bachelor degree in science, a major in chemistry, and minor in psychology in 1971, and an MBA in 1983. Since 1965, after buying his first SLR camera, he discovered a passion for capturing outstanding moments. Going from a black and white film and a darkroom development, he moved to color slides. In 2005, he bought his first digital camera and learned how to develop his pictures with a computer. Since 2011, he has acquired a deeper understanding of the art of photography and the power of communication that it has. In 2019, he became part of the MILSET family as the president of the jury for the MILSET Esteem Photo Contest. That is an activity open for everybody and for all youth from 13 to 25 years old that are passionate for taking photography and also for the science. So today we receive Mr. Norman to talk about do and don'ts for better pictures. So please take notes that will be useful for your involvement in all these contests. So welcome, Mr. Norman. The mic is yours.
Okay. Well, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all of you out there. First, I need to tell you that this conference is designed to guide you and help you to create photos, images, pictures, or pics. Call them what you want. There's a lot of different terms for them, but all of them should be eventually of better quality and of a greater visual impact. Photography is a visual art. So this is what I'm aiming at. Actually, at the end of the day, I want you to be aware of what you should put into the pictures and what you should leave out of your photos. Definitely, that's one major element. And to do that, I'll be using photos that were actually submitted in last year's MILSET contest. And so we're working with real submitted pictures and not photos I took out of the internet. I will show you what to avoid, what to remove in your photos, as well as what to do and what to make sure is in your photos before you submit them, actually. These simple practices shall help you create better images regardless of the equipment you'll be using. Equipment, whether it be a phone or a camera, and whether you're developing your pictures in the phone, in the camera, or using a PC to make necessary corrections. Okay, let's move to the next slide and I'll show you the content of the presentation. Next one. Okay, so we'll work on two different subjects. One is more technical, image content, exposure, and focus. And as you can see, some of the secondary elements will be the primary subject. In other words, what is the intent of your picture? Competing elements, exposure, focus, contrast on the primary subject. And a very technical term in photography, but very important, depth of field, also known as DOP. On the more, I'd say, creative and artistic side, we'll have composition, and some of the elements in there is the location of your primary subject in the frame of the picture. The frame ratio, is it square, is it rectangle, is it portrait or landscape? We'll discuss all of those. One major problem sometimes is tilted images, and sometimes it's artistically wise to tilt the image, so we'll discuss that also. Color saturation, white balance, although that is of a technical nature, it can also be used as a creative aspect. And black and white pictures, definitely, we will be looking at that. I'll be using the images to show what to avoid and what to do. In each of the images shown, we will have comments to that effect. Next slide. So in group one, the first set of pictures, we'll be looking more specifically at image content. Where's the primary subject? What are some of the other elements in the picture? Light exposure and contrast, focused and depth of field. Next slide. Okay, here's the first picture. Now, all of the pictures will be presented pretty much the same way, where on the left side at the top, I'll have subject, rain, water, and grass in this case, which comes from the photographer. This is not me indicating what the subject is. This is what the photographer who submitted this picture said. And on the top, I will have in red things that are a problem with the picture. In this case, we have foreground and background that do not contribute to this picture. Let's move to the next slide to see what I mean. So circled in red, we have the foreground and the background. And the question I have here is, where is the primary subject? Rainwater and grass. We can maybe guess that it's in the foreground at the bottom, at that kind of blurry area. Is it blurry because it's out of focus? Is it blurry because it's water? Is it in the background at the top? I don't think so. I can see grass and maybe a wall of some sort. But obviously in this picture, the foreground and the background do not contribute to the subject. Not clearly anyway. And we also have here DOP, depth of field, is very shallow. It's very thin. And I've indicated to the right side of the picture where the depth of field is. Depth of field, simple definition, it's the part of the picture that's in focus. Here we have something like a couple of centimeters, 5-6 inches that are in focus, and there's some water in there, but there's very little grass. So the subject could be in there, but it probably isn't. So problem with this picture is, one, where's the primary subject? And why is the foreground and background so important? Those two parts take about 60% of the surface of the picture. That's not a good ratio. We'll talk about that in other pictures. Okay, let's look at another picture. Next slide. So here we have something quite interesting. I appreciate the fact that the photographer built the boat instead of using something already manufactured or created. So I took a piece of paper and folded it. So the subject is floating objects. But look, my main criticism here is the subject occupies a very small part of the image. And there's a lot of competing elements. There's a lot of other things in there. And let's look at the next slide and see what I'm talking about in terms of other competing elements. Everything that's circled in red are competing elements. In other words, they attract the eye of the viewer to those parts of the picture which are not the primary subject. The primary subject is the boat and its shadow in the water. And so we have all these things that are distracting the viewer. And we also have in the blue circle what I call a competing conflict of objects in the picture. In other words, the primary subject is touching something else, which I don't know what it is. It looks like a light. Maybe it's something else, but it creates a lot of distraction. So problem here, your subject is so small and competing with so much other stuff that it's not interesting for the viewer to look at that. Let's look at another slide where I've corrected it. I've corrected it simply by reframing the subject. And look how big now the boat is in the picture. It's not as in focus as it was before because we're working with JPEG pictures here that are third or fourth generation from the camera onto this presentation today. So it loses in quality. But still, just that picture is more interesting. It brings the eye immediately onto the subject. And even though I've kept some of the elements that are not necessarily needed, they're so small now that they're not as significant. Yes, and the picture is tilted. Look at the horizon in the background of the original picture. Once we reframe it, this tilt doesn't really matter. It's not so bad. Ideally, a boat floats straight. If you look out in the ocean, the boats are straight, like the horizon. In this case, since we're using something else instead of a boat, it doesn't really matter. But tilted pictures are usually avoided. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Very nice picture. It's impressive, and the framing, the panoramic framing is very interesting. It's very wide compared to how high it is. However, the subject are trees, very specific trees, and they're dark. So the main problem with this picture, it's underexposed. Let's look at the next slide, and we'll see what I mean. So I've kept the original one, and then I just simply increase the exposure of the picture. This takes about 4 seconds in your phone. If you're not used to it, 10 seconds. But already in the next picture, you're seeing now the trees in more detail. If I wanted to do a more heavier correction, I would have also done a correction on the second tree and maybe a bit of light. Another problem with this picture is the photographer was too close. If he had stepped back a couple of meters, we would have had the water in the foreground, maybe some reflections of the trees in the foreground, and would have seen a little bit more of the branches and the leaves. These are trees, they're not just trunks. So framing is very important, and I can't improve that. I didn't have, it wasn't in the original picture, so no matter what I do to the framing, I can't correct it. So this has to be done when you're taking the picture. So a great picture that just by being underexposed lost a lot of its quality, basically. And obviously, as judges, we don't make corrections to the picture. We just take them as they are presented to us. Okay, next slide. Okay, interesting subject, rainbows. And in this picture, we have a double rainbow, which is more interesting because they're much rarer. So, but we have a major competition between the rainbow, the branch, the building, the bushes, or whatever is in there. So finally, we can say that the rainbow is the background. And when you're taking a picture on a specific subject, it should be the primary element that comes into the person's view. And here, It's not. It's almost the third element. The competition and the conflict between the other elements is very strong here. And there is no reason for this branch to be in the picture. This was a decision on the part of the photographer. And it's a tilted image, and maybe for creative reasons it was done like that, but it does not add to presenting a rainbow. Let's look at the next slide, and I reframed it and tried to improve it. That's just to indicate the focus was on the branch, and I'd say about a third of the picture is the background. In other words, this bush in the house. So a little bit too much space given to that. Next slide, we'll see what we can do with this picture, but it's not a miracle. I could have taken the branch out with Photoshop, but this is not what this conference is about. It's how you take the picture in a proper way initially. And this removes a lot of time spent in front of your computer. So we still have the branch that's competing heavily, but now the rainbow is more dominant in the picture. So if I'd advice for this photographer, I'd say just take that picture and don't put the branch in it. And it would have been an interesting picture, definitely. And the focus would have been on the rainbow. The camera focus would have been on the rainbow and not the branch that's right in front of it. Okay, next picture. Next slide. Again, a very interesting picture. It's very well framed. The problem here is there's two things: many visual distractions that are not the primary subject. There's some kind of teapot in the background. I don't know what it is. There's white spots, probably shooting through an aquarium, and there's dust or dirt on the aquarium. I don't know what they are. And it's low contrast. Low contrast, you will see it in that picture. The blacks are dark gray, and the whites are light gray. Black and white picture should be black and white. Yes, you will have grays in them, but it should not be all of the picture. Let's look at it with a small correction I brought to it on the contrast. Next slide. As you can see on the right side, same picture. I did remove the white spots. This is in some more sophisticated software on phones. You can probably do that. I use Lightroom to do this. Took about 2 minutes to do that, and probably 5 seconds to correct the contrast. And as you can see, the dark areas are closer to black, and the white areas are not only whiter, but they're showing greater detail. And so now that picture is very interesting. These jellyfish probably are not of any color, so taking it as a black and white picture was a wise decision on the part of the photographer. So sometimes you can adjust the contrast directly when you're taking the picture, and sometimes it's very difficult, and you have to make it in a post-production phase of your camera. Okay, next slide. Yes, this is very, very interesting picture. The action is there, the spark of the welding techniques and the light, and the composition of the welder, the mask, the helmet on his face. Yet the background is competing heavily with the primary subject. I kept looking at the background in the top left corner where there's a lot of light and there's also a lot of detail. And it's distracting the viewer. This could have been different if the photographer had moved a little bit to his left and would have faced with the welder and the action. But once you've got that picture and you can correct it a little bit, and let's go to the next slide to see what I did with it. Very simply, I just darkened that area. You still can see a little bit of detail, but it's much less distracting. It's not the best correction you can make. It was a short and quick correction just to see what I could do without spending 20 minutes on the picture. And it still has that action-oriented, and the welding technique, which is a primary subject, just stands out and jumps at you as an observer. So this is what you'd like to get as a final product. Maybe there was no space to move around and the photographer had to take the picture in that, and sometimes taking pictures, comes with physical constraints. You can't move back or you can't move up to the subject. So maybe in your post-production part, you can correct some of these limitations, if you will. Okay, next slide. All right. This is a very scientific picture. I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand it. I had to read the description and even the title, non-Newtonian fluid. I couldn't explain it to you. But I was looking at the picture and I thought it very visually interesting. Yet again, we have underexposure and maybe a framing that's a little bit too wide. Let's move to the next slide and see what we can do to improve this. So two little retouches. One is to reframe it a little bit tighter. From a ratio of maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5, we go to a ratio of 3 to 4. But more importantly, the brightness of the picture brings out the blue and brings out the green and the contrast between the two colors and the contrast within the green area also. So the scientific subject comes out loud and clear when you show a little bit more light into it. So very simple correction, very interesting picture to start with. With minor changes, we get a much interesting image in the end. Okay, next slide. Also an interesting original picture, a reflection of anything on a reflective surface like glass or like water always creates an interesting visual impact. So when you can use that, use it. Here the problem is more with a very shallow depth of field. The only part of the picture that's clear is the bottom of the glass or the bottle. I'm not sure what the object is. And then as we move back, it gets blurry very quickly. I can't fix that. Once that picture is made, there's little software that can change lack of clarity or depth of field, focus, call it what you want. So the trick is to take many pictures at different types of depth of field and keep the best one. So here I just want to indicate what happens when your depth of field is too shallow. In this case, it looks like it's about a centimeter at best, half an inch. And so from an artistic point of view, maybe it's great, but here, light through glass, I'm not so sure that it's the right way of doing that. Okay, next slide. Now we're moving into another group. Also, things to avoid. We'll talk more about framing the primary subject. I've already shown some examples of framing that weren't actually the right ones, but I will look at it in greater details here. The image ratio, the image orientation, the tilted image, color saturation, definitely an issue here. Let's look at the next slide, specific examples. Candle, very artistic picture. One major flaw here in the picture, flame from a candle does not shine tilted. It shines up. If we were using a flame under pressure, like a welding torch or something like that, we could have the flame in all kinds of directions. Here we have free-flowing flame, and the title is combustion. So there's a little bit of a mistake here. From an artistic point of view, tilting the candle was nice, but I don't think it is appropriate for what is intended here. So let's look at the next slide, and I'll show what we can do with the same picture. And in this case, I didn't even make modifications to the light. You see, it's the same exposure, but now the flame is flaming up, and the framing is tighter. It's closer to the flame, and so now the flame is taking up a bigger part of the picture. Instead of being maybe, I don't know, 5–10% before, now it's probably closer to 20% of the picture. But it is the primary subject, combustion. It's the flame. It's not the candle. So a very simple modification brought it to a much more interesting image from a visual point of view. Okay, next slide. The moon. definitely is the primary subject. That's the only thing in the picture. So we have no problem with competition or other elements. We only have the moon, but it's in an odd place in the frame. Why would it be at the top and not at the bottom on the side? None of the sides are similar in terms of distance. So in the next slide, we will see, I just reframed it. I still don't like what I generated. It's a little bit too tight. So next slide. So working with what I had, very thin space at the top. I put just about the same amount of space everywhere. It could have been, if we had more space, I would have left more space on each side. One other element here, and I'm not sure it's the photographer's fault, but the moon is not sharp. It's not in focus perfect. And in pictures like this, focus is very important. You're not showing the moon through clouds or through branches or with a background of mountains and stuff. You're showing the moon for its craters, its details. And so you have to make sure, if you're going to go for that kind of picture, it's got to be in perfect focus. As I said before, for another picture, by the time we get these pictures, they were taken, transferred into a JPEG, sent by some kind of digital format. We put it in a PowerPoint. So every time we transfer the picture, it's losing a little bit of its quality. So imagine if the initial picture is not in focus, by the time the judges see it, by the time we put it here in the streaming, it loses a little bit of its quality. So you as the photographer need to be extremely careful here to take a very sharp picture. And if all of you are using digital equipment versus the film, you can take many pictures and keep the one that's got the best focus. That's the trick for this kind of picture. Okay, next slide. Very interesting scientific concept, a hologram. The picture in itself is great. The table and the image, it's just that the framing is too tall, too much black space on top. I made one simple correction. We'll see it on the next slide, and it improves it significantly. So it's almost square, not perfectly square on one side, and I left it as a rectangular. I also kept the table in there because the table adds something to the picture. You don't want something floating in the air with a very, very tight square around the subject. And immediately, the primary subject takes more space in the picture. We're keeping the dark background. The contrast is good. And it's right there in the middle. And in this case, being in the middle makes all the sense in the world. And so sometimes a very quick reframing of your subject will improve the picture 100%. So there's no retouching of the image. It's just the framing on this one. All right. Next picture. Next slide. Scorpion mother with the babies. I thought that was very interesting subject. My problem with this picture is the framing again and the image ratio. It's a very tall picture. It's what we call a portrait orientation. And there's wasted space, and it makes the subject small in the picture. So I reframed it, and let's look at the next slide. By reframing it, the primary subject, which is the scorpion mother and the babies, takes up, I'd say, a quarter of the picture instead of maybe, I don't know, in the other picture, much less, maybe, I don't know, 1/10 of the picture. And so always be conscious of what is your subject and what the subject should take in terms of space in your final product. Now, the problem with my picture is that we're getting a lot of detail from the bottom of the glass, which is competing with the primary subject. So my recommendation would have been, we'll try it in another type of glass, just simple, a glass made out of glass or plastic with no printing on it. So there's no visual distraction on that, because the rest is very nice. The details are great, and we can see specifically what the photographer wants to show us. So make sure your primary subject is always taking as much space as possible within your picture. The fact that it's in the bottom corner is okay. It doesn't need to be in the center, but certainly has to take more space than the original picture. Okay, next picture. Ah, yes, another great picture. Great framing choice. We have a square picture. It's great for this. The content of this picture is very suitable for a square picture. It's just that it's tilted. The tree, and that's why I put some lines in there. The horizon is tilted, and I thought maybe it's a mountain, maybe, but then trees don't grow tilted that way. So I just corrected it in different ways. So let's go to the next picture to see the corrections I brought to it. Okay, so I kept the square, and I just untilted the picture and put a little bit more light in it. So in other words, I increased the light, so the background, it looks more sunny, and it's not as dull as the previous. And I'm assuming here that this butterfly is black and white and a streak of red. If it's gray, I apologize to the photographer for making it white, but I suspect that that's the real color of, and only the photographer knows that. But at least correct the tilted in any picture. Also, what I got rid of was the white sky, and as you can see on the left side, the white sky blends into the background. So if you were to print this picture on white paper, which is usually the case, you would kind of have, we call it bleed into the picture bleeds into the background, and it's usually things you have to avoid. But in this case, in the second picture, the background fills in beautifully, and it creates its own frame as it is. But the initial picture was very nice in terms of how close it was taken to the butterfly. The initial picture, the butterfly is big. It's bigger than the next one because I changed the frame on it. So definitely, these are the kinds of picture you have to step into. You have to be close to your subject. Okay, next picture. Group 3, things to do. Now we're moving into things that are well done by the photographer. I'm showing things that you should copy, basically. Not so much the subjects, but the how, the techniques, and the way it was done. So we're looking at light exposure and contrast, focused and depth of field. I'll explain what depth of field is with specific pictures. Next slide. Okay, so the art of life, and obviously we know what it is. Great picture, great composition. In other words, the subjects there's no distraction from other elements. The black background shows these jellyfish, and there's some of them are further back and are very light at the bottom, especially, but the exposure and contrast of the top jellyfish are great. And it's an exceptional ratio. The framing ratio is very tall and very narrow, and that can be done in post-production. Some maybe in camera settings you can get this kind, and it makes a lot of sense to use this framing because you're indicating things that are moving up into the pictures versus moving sideways. So even though it's static, it gives you the impression of movement. The focus is great. I guess it's difficult to see during this presentation, but I blew up this picture a lot when I was looking at it, and the details are extremely good. And obviously, this is a picture where focus is very, very important. You can't be fuzzy on this because the nature of the subject is detail. You have to bring detail to the picture, and this photographer did the job. Next slide. Archimedes principle. So everything is pretty good. I have one little detail, I'll get to it, depth of field at the bottom, that could have been better. But the focus on the primary subject, which were the oil droplets in the water, the ones that are closest to the camera are really a good focus. The water line is very interesting, showing outside the water, inside the water. It's a straight image. In other words, the water is not tilted. Very important here. If you're going to put a glass of water on the table and take a picture of it, the water surface should be very straight. Exposure is good. The light composition, we have dark areas and light areas. Very good composition here. The depth of field here is a little bit too slim. In other words, the oil bubbles up front are clear, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more clarity with the other bubbles in the background. But it's still a very, very good bubble. We're seeing air bubbles attached to the oil bubbles, which is fantastic. This is what we want to see in a picture. It would have been nice if all of those little air bubbles had been clear right to the bottom, and there's ways of doing that. Okay, next picture. Okay. Portrait orientation, soil erosion. That's the subject. So it's focused, the tree, the erosion is there, the sky is very dominant, but not really a problem. It's late day. I would assume that we're working with sun that is close to the horizon, and so the shadows are long, which is very interesting. But the subject is soil erosion, and we can see it. It's loud and clear. My comments or some of the problems that could be corrected is the color saturation is a little bit light. I like things to be a little bit more contrasty, but late day sun will give you this kind of original picture, and then maybe you can correct it in your phone, in your camera, or in your computer. The image ratio is a little bit too tall, and so we have a lot of sky above the tree, and it could be a little bit tighter. I don't know if I made a correction on it. Let's look at the next slide. I think I did. Yes. I like the next slide for the composition. I don't like it for the color. The changes that I've made very quickly. I'd have to work on this picture a little bit more, but we're working here with very limited, not out of camera images, but images that have been modified already. But just to show the framing, a little bit less sky, making the tree and its base a little bigger. That is your subject. Make that bigger. If you were talking to me about the sky, well, maybe the original picture would be okay. But in this case, make sure that your subject is taking as much space as possible while leaving space around it. But certainly that was my intent in the second picture. Okay, let's move on to the next. Very, very interesting picture. The sunflower, that's the subject. And you can't avoid seeing the sunflower. It's there in color, it's there in shape. It's not in the middle. It's a very artistic choice to put it to the side. It makes a lot of sense. It's bringing the background into the picture while the background is out of focus, which is not distracting to the eye, but you can see that you're in a field. And there's clouds and there's dried grass or whatever it is. The choice of the image ratio is very interesting. In other words, the height versus the width. The orientation, instead of being like the previous picture where it was portrait, it was a tall picture. This one is on its side. The focus on the primary subject is impeccable. And the depth of field, how much is in focus, is very slim. The minute you leave the flower and you go behind, it's it's not clear, and that's fine. We're not taking a picture of the dried grass here. We're taking a picture of the flower. So you don't want the dried grass and the mountain in the background to distract the eye. So a shallow depth of field was a very appropriate choice on the photographer's intent. And so sometimes depth of field will show details in the background that are interesting, like the oil bubbles we had floating before. It would have been nice to have a 4 or 5 inches or 10 centimeters of depth of field, and we didn't. That was a flaw. Here, depth of field would have been a mistake. To see the grass in clear detail for 100 feet would not have been an interesting picture. So here, framing and depth of field were wisely used by the photographer. Next slide. Great. Primary, framing the primary subject. That is very important to choose the framing. In this case, it's a square frame. Others were rectangulars. When do I use one? When do I use another? That's the creative side of photography. In this case, the photographer wanted us to focus our eyes on the lizard, on the fruits, on the dotted leaves. And a square frame does that perfectly. There's still stuff outside that, but as we go outside the primary subject, the depth of field takes care and makes those objects, branches, and leaves less clear to the eye. So there was a very wise choice of image ratio. That's what we call in photography 1:1, a square. Exposure and contrast is impeccable. And the focus and depth of field also allow you to see the fruits as well as the animal, as well as the leaves that are close to the subject. And for the rest, it gets blurry. So definitely, this was a very wise choice from a creative point of view and from a technical point of view. Next slide. Okay. Fantastic picture. Framing the subject, no visual distraction, focus and depth of field. As you can see, what's in focus is the floating paperclip. You don't see what's in the water. If it's water, I'm assuming that's what it is. There's some light there, but you don't know what it is. And so there's no distraction. Your eye is not tempted to look elsewhere because when the eye looks out, the information is blurred. So there's no interest to be there. On the next slide, I made a slight correction to the picture, thinking it would bring the subject closer. Next slide. All I did is I increased the exposure. It's a bit brighter. Oh, that's it. That's all. It's not even local. I brightened the whole picture. I didn't change the frame. And so now the picture shows a paperclip floating in the water. And when you see it full screen, the detail of the water around the paperclip is very nice. The background is a little bit clearer, but not distracting. So this is a retouching that takes about 6 to 10 seconds, depending how good you are on your phone or on your computer. It's really not complicated. But the framing of the picture was impeccable from the start. Okay, next slide. Very different from a picture taken 6 inches away. Now we're talking 2-3 kilometers away. Very strong picture. The presence of the volcano it takes all the space almost. Yet there's room on top of it for the white cloud, for the sky. And so the composition is very, very, very good. Here, the primary subject is the lens-shaped cloud on the left side, the gray cloud on the left side of the volcano. And that's the scientific concept here. But the strong presence of everything there, I mean, your eyes don't go all over the place here. They stick to where it's important. The gray cloud, the white cloud, and the exposure is great. It's late afternoon. We can see it or early morning. I'm not sure, but usually when it's a little bit orangey like that, it's late afternoon. Great exposure and no unnecessary elements. If the photographer had waited for birds to fly over, it would have been a visual distraction that would not be useful. Maybe there were birds and he removed them using some other software, but at least there's no other distraction. The primary element here is the lens-shaped cloud. That's the subject, and that's what we see very quickly. Great picture. Next slide. Another group, a final group, a composition of the elements of the image, framing, position of the primary subject, choice of frame ratio. I've talked about that before, but these are not a list of the only ratios you have. You have as many ratios as you care to make. You can modify from the standard ratios to any other ratio whatsoever. But the frame orientation is also important. Is it going to be landscape? Is it going to be portrait? Is it going to be square? Color saturation and white balance. A little bit technical, but they can add a lot to the creative aspect of the picture. Okay, next slide. Image ratio. All right. In other words, this is a very wide picture. Wide picture with the subject to one side suggests movement. And we have movement in the water. We're seeing the ripples. So the way the picture or the subject, which is the water spider, is framed, indicates movement and space for that movement. So the water surface ripples and the river flow details are very interesting in this, and yet they're not distracting from the primary subject. It's great composition, and you immediately can see from the ripples in front of the spider and where the spider is and where it's going. That is done by details in the picture and by the composition itself. In other words, the spider is to the left of the picture, moving right. And the details at the bottom of the water are not great, and they shouldn't be. You can't see, even when you're looking with your eyes, details in the water until you put your face in the water with a mask. Then you can. But if you're looking through water, it's always distorted. So that's okay. But the surface of the water is there. And so this is a very, very good picture. Next slide. Aerodynamic shape of the bee. That was the scientific concept behind that. Interesting picture, very difficult picture to take because one of the subjects is moving. And so to get a good picture of a moving, whether it be an animal, a child, an insect, a bird, it's always more complex than taking a volcano that's not moving or not moving much. Let's put it that way. So here, color saturation is great. The image ratio, I think there's too much dead space to the left of the bee. And there's also a heavy foreground. Things that are in front of the bee are taking up too much space. I still think it's a great picture. When you're doing live stuff, it's very difficult to get it right on the first shot. So let's look at a reframe picture. Next slide. I didn't correct anything. I just reframed it to put the primary subject, which was the bee in the flower. And I still have things that are blocking. I can't take them away. You can reframe all night, but when you're taking moving objects like insects, people, birds, dogs, cats, babies, movement is a challenge. Here, 1/2 a second later, the bee would have been closer to the flower and would not have been behind the leaf. So my trick here, take 20 pictures of that. Follow that bee wherever she goes and take pictures until one of them is good. Don't go shoot one picture and leave. Stay with your subject, and that might get you a picture where everything is in the right place. But it's a very good picture. Overall color, shades, and the light is great. So, very minor thing. The fact that one leaf is touching the bee is something you try to avoid. Okay, next picture. Fantastic. The wonderful Milky Way. So the title says it, the picture confirms it. Great portrait orientation. When we take landscape pictures, we tend to take the picture in the landscape format. In other words, not very tall, but very wide. In this case, it's a great choice of having a portrait orientation instead of landscape. The image ratio is great. In other words, the width and the height are the great. If it was narrow, like the jellyfish we had, very narrow, very tall here, it would have cut into the Milky Way that we're trying to portray here. The color of the sky is blue instead of being black. That's a special time of the day. It could be also a little bit of retouching, I don't know, but you can take original pictures and getting a blue sky. The horizon looks like it's slightly illuminated, so we're not in the deep of night, but the stars are out there. So definitely, I don't do that kind of photography, but I've been told it's like a 20-minute period of the night where you can do this, and then it's gone. It's too dark, or it's too light. So definitely, there's a lot of technique in these kinds of pictures. But the color of the sky is nice. The dark mountain silhouette, that's also very important. If you had a lot of distraction at the base of this picture in either city lights or whatever lights, it would not be interesting as it is right now. So either the photographer removed those lights, or he went to a place where there would be no light and took the picture. So this is very, very interesting, and it's a challenging picture to take. Definitely, there's good photography skills involved in this picture, but also good framing. So the artistic aspect of the picture is very interesting also. Okay, next slide. We were far with the volcano. We're very close here with this picture. The magnifying glass, a scientific concept of modifying light. The subject in the frame. The magnifying glass is taking 40% of the picture. It's great. It has to be magnifying something, so it's the page of a book. Fantastic. You can see the effect of non-magnified and magnified text. The image orientation is appropriate to the subject, which is a tall magnifying thing. If it had been a round magnifying glass, maybe a different orientation would have been better, but in this case, it's perfectly chosen. Horizontally straight. The lines in the text in the middle of the picture are very horizontal. At the bottom, they're tilting up, and at the top, they're tilting down. That is perfect. My only objection is the white balance. In other words, there's a little bit of green or yellow in the picture. Is the book, the paper, green and yellow? I don't know. Let's look at the next picture and see. I corrected for white balance. In other words, maybe the light was turning the page a little bit too yellowish or greenish. So maybe some of you would prefer the left side. I just wanted to indicate what correction in white balance could do. In other words, sometimes you have an inside light that creates green shades or yellow shades, and then sometimes it's bluish, whether it's neon lights or bulb lights or whatever. They change the color from the true white light. So the correction on the right side is an example of what you can do. This also is easily corrected with any kind of basic software in camera or in computer. So you don't need even to go to Lightroom or Photoshop to get this kind of correction. It's available elsewhere. I also cheated a little bit and removed the top right corner. I thought that it was a distraction in the picture. So I reframed slightly to remove that. It doesn't add anything, that corner, so I took it away from the picture, but basically the initial colors are there, and didn't do much for the rest other than the white balance. Okay, next picture. The mantis. This is a great picture from every perspective. The color saturation, the pale green of the plants around the subject itself. The image orientation in this case is landscape, and the subject is framed two different ways. In other words, it is framed by the picture frame, but it's also framed by the branch to which it's attached on the left. And there's also another dark branch on the right side, at the lower right side, that sort of creates a frame within a frame. And it focuses your eyes on the subject. I don't know if the photographer did that purposely or not, but he succeeded in framing the picture and framing the primary subject here, which is the mantis. So it contributes to a great composition. There's no distraction in the picture. So you look at the mantis and you look at the detail of it and so on, and the surrounding vegetation does not attract you necessarily elsewhere. So this is why this picture is so great, and it's in focus. The focus is perfect on, look at the antennas here. Even looking through your computer with a picture that was copied like 4 times before it got there, it's still very detailed, so you can imagine that the original picture was extremely well taken. Okay, next slide. The lotus effect, hydrophobia, in other words, water's coming out of. This is not rainwater falling on the plant. Apparently, it's water coming out of the plant. So the subject in the frame, where we want to show the flowers with the water coming out of them, and that's what it does very, very, very well. There's background to it, but I find that the background does not distract from the primary subject. The color is very clear, and the water droplets are very obvious, and it does a great job of showing us the phenomenon that the photographer wanted to share with us. So the image orientation makes a lot of sense, and the color saturation is intense. The red is very red, the purple is very purple, but the background is much lighter. The flowers on the ground are there. You can see them, but they're not distracting the viewer from the red flowers and the droplets. So, yes, we could criticize and say, maybe if you'd moved to the right and put the green background behind, yeah, it might have, but it's not a major issue. To this picture is showing what the photographer wanted to show, the lotus effect, hydrophobia. In other words, water being expulsed from the plants. It probably is rainwater that was captured. I don't know what the scientific cycle is on this, but it was well captured by the photographer on this one. Next slide. Okay, sunset colors and pollution. So that's the subject. So where's the subject here? Right in the middle of the picture at the bottom. And at the top, we can see different colors in the sky due to pollution. The V framing by the buildings of the sky is a major composition accomplishment. This is fantastic. And we're seeing different colors in the sky. This, I'm assuming, is the effect of pollution, and it's filtering the light in different shapes. And so it's great composition. The only element that I found was distracting was the cars in the street where they had reflecting the light. So if we look at the next slide, we can see small corrections that I made to it just to keep the eye in the right place. Next slide. I simply darkened what was already very dark, and I didn't retouch the street as much because I thought it was sort of a signal to the eye to move towards the sunset. But the little distractions on the right and on the left, the windows and the cars in the street, were not necessary for this picture. I didn't touch the sky at all. And this was a great picture to start with. A very simple modification, a retouching, just eliminated certain distractions that were not useful to the picture. So this was a great picture to start with, basically. That was our last picture, and now I'm leaving you with some best practices that depend on where you are and what kind of pictures you are doing. So for outside photos, I suggest that before taking the picture, visit the subject location at different times of day. Should I take this picture at 8 o'clock in the morning with the sun rising? Should I take it at noon for the shadows? Should I take it at 4 in the afternoon or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, depending where the sun is? Is it sunny? Is it not sunny? So get a reading for the best light. Sometimes, and as I say in the next point, sunny days are great, but they come with exposure challenges, very sharp shadows, or very white exposed parts of your picture, which burn completely parts of the picture, and you have no detail in them. And so sometimes what you want to take should be taken on a cloudy day. Clouds are great filters of light, and they shed white light, and it keeps the colors right, but sometimes it's too dark, and you're not getting enough light to do. So great sunny days are not always great picture days. Let's keep that in mind. For inside photos, I have only one, and I underlined it, one type of light source. If you've got inside lights, the sunlight coming in, you've got neons, and you've got light bulbs, and you've got a LED light somewhere, and you'll have so many shades of light in your picture, you won't be able to correct it with any software whatsoever. So it sounds strange, but shut the lights down, open the windows if you have them, or use one set of light. Open all the lights in your house, make sure they're all the same, light bulbs, but no neons, or all neons and no light bulbs. So one type of light source, windows for natural light, flash if you can have a flash on your camera, which tends to be white light, the equivalent of the sun. Neon lights, which tend to be green, blue, yellow, depending on the nature of the neon you've got. LEDs tend to be bluish, and so they shed blue shadows. You can correct that afterwards if you have only one source of light. If you have three sources of light, you will have a lot of problem correct, because when you're correcting for one, you're creating a problem with the other source of light. Next advice, use reflective surfaces. Oh, sorry, don't change the slide. I'm not finished. Did you come back? Outside photos. Okay, use reflective surfaces. White cardboard, bed sheets, walls. These are cheap equipment that you have in the house that you can use to create more light. Reflecting sunlight that's coming through a window, when you don't want that light to be in your picture, you can use all kinds of white surfaces, whether it be cardboard or a bed sheet or a pillow sheet, whatever you've got, to reflect on a small object. Obviously, you can't reflect in the whole room, but you can reflect light on a specific subject. So without getting into photographic expensive equipment, you can find white surfaces in the house, and it can also help you get rid of unwanted dark areas on your subject. And so you try it with and without the reflective surfaces, see what it does. And one trick I should give you, you have a subject, take 10, 20, 25 pictures of it and send one or two in. But don't take one picture and walk away from it. That's risky business unless you're an extremely experienced photographer. Choose from 10 to choose from 20, and you get a better choice. And if there was conflicting elements in the initial pictures, you may have gotten rid of them in the following pictures. For all photos, I suggest you get inspired by looking at how other photographers photograph your subject. You're photographing mountains, go on internet anywhere, pictures of, and you will have tons of examples. I'm not saying to copy what, but look at how they did it, how close they were to the subject, what is obvious, where's the light coming from, where is it going, and so get some ideas and then make your own setup, make your own situation, and create it. There's challenges for shooting outside, there's challenges for shooting inside the house or a closed environment. The lights are different. Okay, I think we have another slide. Yes, outside. Okay, for all photos, take time to stop and see what's around your subject. What's conflicting? what should not be in the picture? Should I move towards my subject or move back from the subject? As we saw in some of the pictures, the photographer was too close, cut the top of the trees, didn't take the river in front of the trees in the picture. So move up towards and back. If some of you have zoom lenses, you can stay in one place and zoom in and zoom out. But for you, using phones or using a simple lens with no focus, then the focus becomes your feet. You walk towards the subject or you walk away from the subject. Very simple. Take numerous photos of the same subject. Position the subject in the picture frame. Closer, further. From different perspectives. You might want to shoot by lying down on the ground and shoot at the same level as the flower instead of shooting it from you standing above the flower. And try all of them. Try all the directions and the angles. Landscape and portrait orientation. Try both. Yes, there are some things. Okay, this is a landscape. It's a mountain. I have to shoot it landscape. Well, do that and try the volcano in a different direction. And then when you have 6, 7, 10 pictures, choose the best one for you. And maybe have somebody give you, ask your mother, your father, your brother, your friend, what do you think of the pictures? Which one impresses you more? And then discuss with the person, why is it more interesting? So definitely, if you have 6 pictures, you can do that. If you have 1, that's it. You go home with it, and that's all you can present. Keep the picture that tells the best story about your subject, as far as you're concerned, but it's nice to have somebody else's opinion. And it's amazing when non-photographers give you advice, there's truth in there, because they're just reacting as an observer. And they'll say, why did you keep that tree in the picture? And then you say, okay, I have one without the tree. All right, so let's look at the other one. Retouching in camera or on PC, you may have to do that to reframe. Look for the best framing of subject, a square, horizontal, vertical framing. Allow yourself to look at different adjustments. Adjust for exposure. We saw some pictures were too dark. Others were maybe too light. Color saturation, contrast, white balance. These are all things you can do in camera. And if you have software and your computer, you can go an extra mile on that. So I think this is where I end with my recommendations. I think we'll be moving on to questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Normand. As always, hearing you and all your experience is great. We were always on the screen hearing you. And well, we have some questions from the audience, but first, a lot of greetings from Argentina, Canada, from Chile, also from Paraguay, Mexico, and a lot of places from Latin America who are watching us. And well, I will start with the question and answer section. The first question is from Club Ciencias Chile, from Maria Angelica, Club Ciencias Chile president. She's asking, in times of pandemics, what are the recommendations for our students when using a phone to take a photo?
That's an interesting question, because I've done more photography during this period than ever before, because places were empty. I could go just about everywhere in parks and different places. So I would say that if you want to take pictures of objects, of nature, it tends to be simpler these days, but you have to be careful. If there's people in the park or elsewhere, you definitely have to keep your distances. But to me, in the last, I'd say 12 months, it wasn't a photographic challenge. It was, I would even say, simpler. And I had pictures I could never take before. In the middle of a big street in my city, Montreal, with no cars anywhere, no buses. It was empty streets that usually are completely filled. So you get to do pictures that you would not. But obviously you have to be careful if there's curfews or anything like that. You have to be home by a certain hour or whatever. You have to take that into consideration. But I don't think it changes anything regarding light and picture taking, unless there's a more specific question to that effect. I'd say I did pictures I could never do of empty highways, of empty streets, of empty parks. I did a whole series of empty children's park with no kids in the swings and the park, totally empty and wrapped with yellow tape, emergency tapes by the firemen. And so I got pictures I would never have had. I think now you can't get away because the parks are filling up again. So this was a one-time opportunity. So yes, definitely. I think it's no longer an opportunity, but I guess now you have to do it with a mask and everything. And I'm not too keen on taking pictures of people with masks. I don't find that interesting, but the pictures you will be taking, as we can see, the ones we showed, there were no people in them. I don't think it's a people contest. It's more of scientific phenomenon. So definitely that makes it a little bit easier. I don't know what to add to that, but I think that's my primary reaction to that.
Thank you very much, Norman. The next question from Mexico is, do I need an expensive camera to take good pictures?
No. You don't need expensive equipment. Most phones today, I have an iPhone 6, and I think the top of the line is iPhone 12, so I'm 6 models behind right now, and I will use that frequently to take pictures as reminders of pictures I want to take with my camera, and sometimes that picture turns out to be good in itself. It's trickier with a phone, but you don't need $1,000 or euro camera. What these models will give you is added flexibility for difficult conditions. But if you're taking nature pictures outside, wait for light, and then you've got the major ingredient. Photography is writing with light. So if you've got the good light during the day, great. Now, if you're taking a picture of the Milky Way, you need good equipment. I'm not sure. I would never try that with a phone because I wouldn't know how to do it actually. But for the more simpler pictures taken in daylight or inside, the phone cameras today are very, very good, and they have in-phone software to modify your pictures. So no, you don't have to go much further than that. And I'm sure that some of the pictures I show you were taken with phones. I don't know. I don't have that information, but I would bet that we had maybe a quarter of those pictures were taken with phones. So yes.
Thank you very much, Norman. Next question is, how would I know? I think you have already answered kind of this question, but I will ask it again. It's, how would I know if I took a good photo? It's a good question.
Listen, I think you should always ask yourself that question. You should always have a little bit of that doubt. The day you say, hey, this is great. I took one picture and it's great and I'm going home. I've been shooting for about 50 years now, and I still have doubts. And I know it's a great picture when I present it to my colleagues in my clubs and stuff like that. And they say, oh, my God, this is fantastic. And then I get the confirmation that it's great. But obviously, there's some rules. And by comparing it to other people, by looking at pictures of other photographers, then you can challenge yourself and get a better impression. But if it's out of focus, if the major subject is touching the frame and there are some major mistakes that you've made, you should be able to see it. And if you take 8, 9, 10 pictures of the same subject, you will find one that's better than the others, or 2 or 3. And if you limit yourself to one, you're limiting yourself to getting the great picture. So if doubt persists, that's great. It's a good thing that you still have doubts about your picture, but at some point you need to submit one and get other people to comment on it. It could be non-photographers. That sometimes is a source of information that could be very useful. Obviously, other photographers would have their preferences, have their style, so they might criticize your picture because they tend to put the subject in the middle and you don't. And so then there's style. So be careful. Sometimes the advice is just a question of style versus technique. But taking more than one picture, I would say more than 5 is a good idea, and then look at them, wait a day or two, look at them again, and then you will eventually feel more comfortable with one image than another. There's a lot of instinct in photography, so follow your instinct.
Thank you, Norman. Well, last year, I know that it was a challenge to select the winners of the SPC 2020. And this question, I think it's perfect for people who want to participate in the SPC, and of course, they want to win. So what advice could you give to the JAO to make a good description of their photos?
Well, a good description of the photos that are submitted, let's assume we have a great picture to start with. So we're not worried about the quality of the picture, but we did get last year some people with great picture and an explanation that I've got a scientific background. I love science, I read science, but I'm not a scientist, I know where. But I could not understand what the picture referred to because it was more of a poetic title, for one. And then when I started reading it, it wasn't explaining what the science was behind it. So definitely the advice would be to explain what scientific concept is presented here and make sure that the scientific concept is obvious in the picture. And so it's a challenge. I only do pictures and I just put them up there. I don't have to explain them. But in this contest, though, the author of the picture needs to explain it from the scientific aspect. And that's an extra challenge. This is why we give points for that. But when the scientific aspect of the picture is not clear to us, well, obviously, there's less points offered to them. So know what you want to transmit to the non-scientific reader, because most of the judges are not scientists or don't have a scientific background. They're photographers. But I saw some texts that were very clear, 3 lines, maybe less than 100 words, and I knew what they were talking about. The lens-shaped cloud on a volcano. I never knew that existed. I learned it from that one picture, and I now understand what it is. I couldn't teach it in school, but I now understand what it is. You have vapor on one side, and you have another cloud. So, in other words, put your teacher's shoes on and teach whoever's going to look at the picture what this is. And it's nice to be poetic, but if in your poetry you lose information or it's too vague, then the explanation of the picture loses points. So, and don't worry, we're not giving points for the quality of the English. My English is so, and I can understand that for some people making a sentence with all the right things is difficult. Don't worry, we don't look at that. We what's the message that you're sending us? And if it's not clear, you're losing points. Or if it doesn't match the picture,
Yeah, you're right. Thank you very much, Norman. And well, this other question, just to reinforce the idea that people can use cell phones to participate. Mm-hmm. Do these tips work do these tips work if you use a cell phone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've seen some very, very good pictures in the 250 that I had to look at, and the final 50 that we eventually evaluated, and we could tell, we knew that they were cell phone, and today's cell phone, even from previous generations, are of very high quality. You need the right light, but still they're very high quality, and you can get a very good picture. And so But if your framing is off, if your focus is off, although focused with a cell phone, you've really got to be either moving or taking something too close. But nowadays, these cell phones can do a very good job, even on closer pictures. So I would say that it's more of the picture technique that's the issue versus the equipment. And you could have a $5,000 camera in your hand and take very bad pictures. It's very easy to take a bad picture, So the trick is multi pictures of the same subject. Give yourself a chance by taking 8, 9, 10 pictures of the same subject, and you're bound to have better quality just by doing that.
Thank you, Norman. And well, the last question of this section is, sorry, editing the photo could be considered cheating?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Your camera edits the picture for you. So you've already started cheating when you press on the button to take the picture, because some software engineer at Apple or Samsung or whatever has put in a program in there to take whatever you took and then modify the colors and the light and so on to average out certain things. So there's also immediately from the picture to the JPEG it generates, or the raw picture it generates, there's correction. So if you're shooting JPEG from a camera or from a phone, you already have modified the picture. So this better than holy attitude that I don't retouch my pictures because I take them as is. I mean, in the 70s, people took pictures on films and would retouch the negatives and retouch as they were exposing. Retouching is not just from the numerical age, it's from way back, because there are limits to what a camera can do, and retouching them to improve the contrast, or there was not enough light and you could not create light because you were outside, so you did your best, and then in camera you add a little bit of highlight. This is part of the creative process. But some people say the minute the picture is taken, I have to like etch it in stone so it doesn't move, and that's it. Well, that's limiting your photographic abilities. And I can understand that some people don't have Lightroom and Photoshop and everything, but all phones have software in them to correct pictures, and all cameras have the same software to a certain degree. And so I don't agree with that, but it's a widespread concept that retouching picture is a sin. It's not artistic. It's not this. It's not that. And I don't agree with that. So, I mean, it's a question of belief. It's almost a religion. Some people are very touchy about, oh, I didn't even retouch it. This is the original. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but it's not the original. Some guy at Samsung has corrected your picture for you, so it looks so that the color balance is there, so exposure is averaged out, and so on and so forth. So it is corrected. You didn't do it because you don't know how to do it, or because you don't want to do it, but it's been done. And so I find it's a false pretense. But it's a big discussion in the photographic world. And yes, there are some contests where you're not allowed to retouch your pictures other than certain things. But you can't Photoshop them. You can't do that. I agree that once you get into Photoshop and add elements to the image or remove them, you remove a tree or you remove a car, well, that should be unallowed in contests. But to improve the light, or to modify the contrast, or to like one of the pictures we had about the book and the lens, where you retouched the color of the picture because it was probably photographed under a neon light, which is not the real light that you were looking at. And neon has a tendency of creating all kinds of weird, so why would you not be allowed to bring the white paper back to white instead of green or yellow or blue? So anyway, that's a debate. As you can see, I get very emotional about this when we talk about retouching. But there are some retouching that's exaggerated. And so, and that's that in a contest, I think that should be prohibited. But some people are so good at retouching that you can't see it. So I can give you gray hair in 20 minutes and people will believe that you have gray hair. So, you know, it's difficult for judges to see what has been retouched and not. We can guess sometimes, but to make it a rule that you cannot retouch the picture, that would be very difficult in today's world. You know, it's so easy. So I don't have that preoccupation in when I'm judging the pictures. I'm judging the final image that was submitted to us. Okay.
Thank you very much, Norman. And we
Okay.
finished this section. We are really grateful for your time and for supporting. Mr. Norman Fafard is MILSET SPC president of the jury. So he is in charge of organizing all the jury to check the pictures that participants submit to this great contest. And well, thank you very much, Norman. And well, now I'm going to give some announcements.
Okay.
First of all, to all the people who is watching and the people who will watch this conference, participate in this great contest is free. You can submit top 3 pictures. So as Norman said, take as much pictures as you can, find the best ones and submit them. It's really easy to follow this contest. So the first tip is take your cell phone or camera, find a nice shoot related to STEAM phenomena, which is important: science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. Describe your picture and submit it. To submit it, please go to spc.milset.org. And there you will find all the rules for submitting, the sizes of the images, and so on. If you have any question, you can also write to spc@milset.org. We can support you in anything you require. And don't miss a chance to win the great prizes we have for you. One of these prizes is 500 euros for the first place. Maybe you can buy a camera with this check. And the second and third place are getting an annual subscription to National Geographic magazine, which is a great magazine with great photographers that work for National Geographic. So we really want you to participate. You have till 31st July. Yeah, Bere? Yes, yeah, July. Sorry. And well, we're waiting for your pictures. And of course, don't forget to follow up all MILSET programs. We are having a great program, a World Summit for all our leaders of organizations and institutions, STEAM institutions around the world. Follow us on social media to get this information. And as every year, we are having the annual event of the World Virtual, well, in this case, for this year, as we continue with the pandemic situation, we will continue organizing the World Virtual Young Citizens Conferences 2021 on November. So follow us on social media to get all this information. And well, thank you very much for being here. We are very glad to have this live transmission today with you, and see you in the next live streaming. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the team that it's behind scenes, Bere and Jose.